G'day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Gear Podcast.
What episode are we up to, Troy? Number 6?
7.
Or number 2?
Episode 7. Am I Troy number 6? Is that what you mean? Like
Yeah, you're
Troy's
Troy
1 to
number
5? Mysteriously disappeared.
Troy's not 1 to 5. Look, their locations are unknown. No one's been looking for them, to be fair, but still.
The council
you
of
are
Troy's.
looking for them. Exactly. How's your week been, mate? You had your first Dockers gig back.
Yep.
The Dockers didn't go too well, but how did you go, more importantly?
I went okay. So I didn't put anything up on the Instagram, like I said, because we sound checked on the roof, as you do. And then it was all okay. Everybody's happy, but there was storm warnings, rain and thunder and all that sort of stuff. So rain is fine. Like, nobody seems to have a problem with me playing in the rain. However, when there's thunderstorms and you're like the tallest person on top of the tallest thing in the area that you're around.
When you're an antenna.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous. So I don't mind them cancelling it for that. So there was thunderstorm warnings, like too close to the start time of the game. So they decided to can it. However, did you watch any of that game?
I did watch some of that game, yeah. I watched the ending.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but it was clear skies. Not clear skies, but it was a beautiful day. No rain, no thunderstorms that I could see. Apparently, maybe like south of the river, there were some storms. So once again, the south is just ruining it for the rest of us.
Exactly. That's a habit that they have here in Perth.
That's right. So I ended up, rather than playing on the roof, I played on level 5, so like the top level under one of the big screens, which is okay. But it was really hot. It was right in the sun, and I had like a little stage. And it was fine. I've got some footage of that. I might put that up because it was pretty funny. I hammed it out a bit. You know, I'm not tethered to a safety rope, so I can sort of jump around a bit more. I jumped on a table. That was cool.
You're free range ham.
Yeah, free range ham.
None of this pre-sliced Dorsonia.
Mate, straight from the deli section.
Just straight from the deli onto the stage.
Can't do that for much longer. They're getting rid of them at all the Woolies and Coles, right? All the deli stations.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, but it is a slight convenience that I'm sure many of our listeners enjoy. And be sure to follow the Instagram as well, because Troy's been posting content on there of his studio. You can go and it's kind of like the visual aid to the Gear Podcast, isn't it? When we talk about stuff that we talk about, you can go and look at it on Instagram. Yep. How are we going on the followers count, Troy?
I'm going to tell you right now, mate. We have 34 as of time of recording. And in fact, we've had a couple of messages, which is nice. We can talk about some today. Luis from the Dominican Republic. He was our 31st follower, so shout out to you.
Fantastic.
Thank you for joining us. And he's got lots of followers too. He's like way out following me. And our friend Chris Brennan as well. He's like, we're going to talk about some stuff that he's asked in a moment. But first, mate, how are you? I didn't ask. Are you well? Things good?
Yeah, living the dream, mate. Been busy. Did not 1 but 2 gigs at our favourite locale, the Henley Brook, on the weekend. Did the usual Friday, and then we did a trio gig on Sunday afternoon. And Cam used his Roland SPDS setup, which he's got set up with like a kick trigger pedal, so that you can play it like a drum kit. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most enjoyable gigs I've done in recent memory. I had such a good time. It was a really nice day because we did 1 till 4. So it was like pumping, lots of people in there, you know, outdoors. I played, people who watch my channel would have seen the Buddy Guy Strat that I've been playing a bit on there. So I played that. Just had a wicked time. We just ended up jamming a bunch of songs that we kind of know as well. So did some King's X, did some Whitesnake, did a whole bunch of fun stuff. So I really enjoyed it, and it sounded really good too.
What King's X song did you play? Was it Goldilocks?
Over My Head.
Over My Head. That's a good one.
Giving it the old Tondi on that one.
Love that song.
We just kind of, there's a riff and then there's some chords and some shouting.
You had a jam sesh, didn't you?
We had a jam sesh. We just kept saying, just have fun with it. You don't know the song, just have fun with it. Now you're having fun.
That's the way I do every gig.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that on Sunday. So,
and then you got to watch the West Coast Eagles finally win a game at Optus Stadium.
Finally win a game at Optus Stadium. Jake the Snake Waterman with 4 biggies.
Yep. They don't have a big TV set up outside at the Hen, do they?
They don't have any TVs.
That's a shame.
That's part of the appeal.
Yeah, it's a shame when you're sitting in the back corner playing a gig and need something to do.
Well, I mean, you know this, right? How many games of football have you watched just by watching the score on your phone? Like not watching the game, just looking at the numbers come up?
Yeah, I have a mic stand phone clip thing now, which partly that controls my little digital desk, but also when I'm done with that, because I only need that to start the gig. Yeah, just pop it up. Have the AFL.com just give me scores, even though it's the worst app and it's so bloody slow to react to anything. You can't like leave it on the score section. You have to scroll down, at least on my phone, to like the live, like what's happening live, and then it'll tell you when someone's kicked a goal. It sucks.
You would think the AFL would sort that out. So I mean, you know, this secretly is a podcast about the AFL and not about guitar gear. But yeah, gigs were good, and I had, I mean, lots of stuff that I've been waiting to put out for a while because, you know, when you do what I do, you have embargoes and NDAs and stuff. So
well, last week,
something we wanted to talk about last week that we couldn't because it didn't come out was that new Headrush Prime. Got a lot of traction. The Q&A that I did last week, lots of people wanted to chime in on. I did a video on, what else did I do? The high gain plugins. There was that Crazy Tube Circuits Motherload, which was really cool. The neural amp modeler.
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
That's pretty...
Like, full disclosure, Uncle Leon, like, I didn't watch all your videos in the last week. I watched the high gain plugin one, but I haven't really had the opportunity. Do you know what happened? I reckon last Thursday I was in prime, like, I need YouTube videos to watch. Like, I was sitting around the studio, I was kind of like tidying up and I was getting ready for some stuff on the weekend. I was like, oh, perfect opportunity to have stuff on in the background. And instead, there was just kind of like nothing out at that particular time I hadn't seen yet. So I think you put a lot of stuff out over the weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And and I've been a little bit busy, unfortunately. So I haven't caught up with everything. But yeah, there's some cool stuff there, man. So what's been what's been tickling your fancy of the stuff that's come out? Anything that's really blown your socks off?
Yeah, I mean, the neural amp modeler thing is cool. If anyone watched my video on it, then they would know what I'm about to talk about. But it's open source. That's kind of the big thing with it. It's very accurate as well. I mean, I watched a video where somebody compared it to Tone X, and there was sort of a lower error margin between that and the amp being profiled than Tone X. And Tone X is awesome. Sounds really, really good.
So you said the neural one is more reliable than the Tone X, is that what you said?
Yeah. It's developed by somebody called Stephen Atkinson, I believe. So it's an open source thing. I mean, the fiddly thing with it is if you want to create your own capture, you take this pre-recorded DI, you run it through, your rig, and then the training happens on like a Google Colabs sheet. So it's like, there's like Python code running and, stuff. So
it just looks like the Matrix.
Yeah, basically it's the Matrix.
Leon's pulling tones out, just like reading the lines of code coming down.
Yeah, but what's cool about it is there's a lot of control over, if you want to train it for 12 hours, you can do that. If you want the neural network to train for 5 minutes, you can also do that. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting approach, and there's people getting around it, which I think is fun. It reminds me, I remember when I first got into the Axifx and going to the forum, how kind of you had this core group of people who were really, really into it, and they had all the, they knew all the hacks and fun tricks and tips, and I mean that element's still there, but I think as a company like Fractal has, they have a lot more stuff out and they have floorboards out, so their kind of user base has massively expanded from a bunch of nerds wanting to do cool stuff to the majority of people just being like, hey, how do I do a dotted eighth note delay, or how do I do this thing with a foot switch? So kind of the focus shifts.
And then you go to youtube.com/Leon Todd, and there's your resource.
Exactly, and that was the long game all along.
And funnily enough, like the amount of people that I know that have Fractal stuff, and I'm like, I was trying to work out how to do this thing, and I typed into Google, and Leon already had a video about it. It was like, you are Mr. Fractal, Fracky themselves.
Yeah. Big time. I mean, and to be fair, there's a really good wiki there, and that's where I learnt everything from.
Is that
so
the Yek? Yek, is that the guy's name?
Shout out to Yek, also known as, I'm sure his mum calls him Alex. Okay. Legendary amount of work. Like, he's basically the only person who runs that wiki, and it's so good.
Man, do you know what's like really awesome that guy does? So like when I've gone through the like different amps in my Axe 8, which admittedly now I don't do it so much. Oh, sidebar, quick sidebar now. I ended up using the Axe 8 for the Dockers game instead of using the Nux, Nuix thing, only because I'm like, you know what, first game back, I just want to make sure this is all going to be okay and
I just want
reliable.
to
And man, I plugged in. It's like, that is just my favorite guitar sound. That 800 thing that I've dialed in, it's so easy for me to play. It's like annoying how much I like it, because I can get good sounds out of like my HX Stomp and all that. But like that sound, it's just like that. It's just so perfect for me. But anyway, going back to what I was going to say, I'm always confused. And I think we've mentioned before, like pairing speaker cabinets and stuff with amps. And I think that's such an underappreciated part of trying to get a guitar sound. So every single amp in the Fractal, he's got it there with the cabinet, which like outside of digital modeling is also awesome. If you've got like, you know, like I tried out, I think that's the reason I tried the greenbacks with the Splawn, and it was like, oh, this sounds so much better. Like struggled with vintage 30s, but the greenbacks is definitely the vibe. So you can sort of use that as what sounds good with my amp. Go to that page and you might, be surprised even if you're looking for a hardware cab, or speakers.
So, it's just it's an amazing resource. And, you go on the forum and like you've got Cliff Chaser's tech notes about amps, which is an amazing resource just for learning about amps. And, this is somebody who's pulled apart, a few hundred different amplifiers and gone through every single component and modeled them. So yeah, that's cool. Anyway, that was a tangent from, it kind of reminds me of that sort of community where it's just a Facebook group.
Yeah. Can I just ask,
really around it?
Can I ask with that, the new neural thing? So you train it, right? So you train your thing and you get what file? Is this like, it's a plugin, or is it like an interface, desktop interface, or it's not a pedal or anything, right? It's just in the computer.
No, it's purely on the computer. So you record a sample.
Yep.
You reamp a DI basically through your rig, and then you upload it. You can train it on your computer if you want, but there's like an easy way to do it. And I kind of like that aspect of it where you've got the option, if you've got an old slow computer, you can use the Google Cloud processing to go through and train the neural network. And then that creates basically an amp model file, and you load that into the plugin.
Right.
With if you've captured the amp with a load box, then you can also load up an IR in there. But aside from that, it's not it's not a fully featured suite with reverb and delay. It's just like you basically create a custom amp model with this neural network training, and then you load an IR, and there you go. You got a guitar sound, and
but when you say it's plugin, it's basically it's like an AAX or a VST plugin that you just dump in your DAW. Is that the vibe?
Yep, I think it's just a VST. You can run it in standalone mode as well. And I had some issues with it where it's only taking input 1 from my interface.
Yep.
No matter what I set to. So it's a bit buggy at the moment, but again, it's open source. I saw someone has already taken it and put it into like a Raspberry Pi style pedal thing. So, I mean, the exciting thing about it, right, is like, capturing, like if you have, you're doing a recording, you can just use this thing. You don't have to pay any money for it. You can capture all the source tones and then you've got them.
Yep.
Or the other thing, again, if you want to go down that kind of homebrew route and you wanted to make yourself a little Raspberry Pi powered pedal that can load captures, then you've got something that sounds. You could get rather than go out and buy the Tonex pedal, you can make your own thing. If you're handy with this stuff,
these are fun projects. Perfect. Yeah, they're fun projects. I mean, it's interesting you say about capturing the tone. So I remember years ago that was a big thing about the Kemper when that first came out, because people were saying, great, you do your session, you get your guitar sound, and then you capture it. And if you need to do overdubs, well, you've got it all in the Kemper ready to go to redo it. And that's a really good idea in theory. I don't know how many people are doing that in practice, and I would be curious to find out. And I don't mean that to shit on them on it, the idea whatsoever. But I never feel like I have the time to be able to capture sound after I've done a part. Particularly if you're constantly changing amps or changing settings or guitars or whatever. It's kind of like, I guess, like if you've found the sound for an entire project, or you're gonna do everything through one sound, that might be one thing. But the Kemper, Okay, well, the Kemper alone, that takes a few minutes to do a profile. The Tone X can take, on my computer, 15 minutes to do a tone in the medium setting to capture.
Yeah, 15, 20 minutes. The Quad Cortex is a couple of minutes.
Yeah,
the
so I said,
Rush has an amp match clone thing that takes a few minutes.
I'm really curious, man, like genuinely, if people are doing that, because it does feel like a really good idea. It's just whether or not in practice it makes sense.
Yeah, I've tried some captures that people have made that sound really, really good.
Like on the fly, like an on the fly capture, like post, you've done your tone, like you've recorded something and then you've done it. Like that's what more from a workflow thing.
Yeah, you'd need to be kind of permanently set up to do it. Some of the capture, my misgivings with a lot of the capture stuff is that, there's no process to go through and filter stuff. You're just constantly scrolling through. It's like scrolling IRs, you know, where you're just like, that sounds okay. And then, out of, a very small percentage sound really good. I captured one of my amps and I know that sounds good and it came out. So I think the strength with it is it's like, hey, if you've got nice amps at home, you can capture all of them. And I'm sure there's manufacturers out there which will just take this and cram it in a pedal that's kind of locked and loaded. The file management end of it, even Tone X, like the file management system on it is crap. Like, it's very confusing in the app. There's certain things that it does where I'm just like, why? You hit the Tone Net button and you can't get your local files. There's a lot to be desired. And then with the Kemper, with the Quad Cortex, with all of this capture stuff, it makes the capture thing accessible. So what you end up with is, rather than being like, wow, this is so good, I can just go and try out all these amazing tones, you end up with this sea of mediocrity, because all these things are, context dependent. So, what might sound great in someone's rig doesn't work for you. So you're just like, oh, well, this is okay. And then, if there's quirks to the amp, like they have push-pull switches or different tone stacks and stuff like that, you're kind of locked into this like generic, it's either got a bit of pre-EQ or post-EQ.
Yep.
So there's that. I mean, it's open source. There's a lot of people in the kind of Facebook group there who are really good about it, and there's a pretty good energy about the group, which I like. Again, it seems like people are very... like there's a very specific demographic, right, of people who are going to really dig this. And they're people who probably like to listen to this podcast, but, they like the deep dive aspect of it. They like the tech aspect of it. It's very attractive, I think, for a very particular subset of guitar players. And there's a whole lot of people who will just never use it or understand what's going on. And I guess that's fine.
It's like, I'm one of those people, man. I love a bit of nerdy tech stuff. I'm always limited by time. Even I said before we started recording, I'm in a bit of a room acoustics thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to take up my next probably 3 weeks of brain power. Whereas probably a month and a half ago, it was all about the Tone X and the modeling. What I can say about the Tone X is I haven't been playing with it so much to capture sounds. However, it has been like so useful to me in an actual practical setting recently, not even with my own stuff, but bringing the amp up and using it for guitar sounds. I used that for a session last week and it was awesome. It was like the song required a Marshall sound, and
there you go.
Was like spot on. It was exactly what I needed, and it was just a stock. I've got the cheapest version of it too, so it doesn't have all the stuff in there. But more usefully, I've been using it on bass. And it's awesome on bass when you want like a decent like SVT sort of sound. It's really, really, really simple.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'd say it's probably my go-to like amp plugin at the moment, mostly because it's new. But it's also nice to know it's like it is a modeled, captured thing and not just a digital recreation. It's like quick to get those sounds. I think when you just need that sound.
There's a definite strength to it, and it is that just speed of like, hey, I know I got this capture, I know it sounds good. I'll just read something about the NAM that came up. I thought this was a pretty good little perspective. It's from Taylor Danley, who has a pretty good YouTube channel, more focusing on like the kind of extreme metal stuff. If you want to go and watch someone dial in a bunch of amps and play Cannibal Corpse riffs really, really well, would highly recommend. Good channel. What was a video that I was thinking of? that I watched recently, and I really, really enjoyed it. Oh yeah, he's got this series of like the old, like going through these solid state amps from the 90s, but he did one, it's called Chug Battle, the ultimate 90s death metal amp. And there's an Ampeg, Marshall valve state, and a crate. If anyone's really into those kind of tones, like Taylor's channel's really, really good for that. But anyway, I'm going to read out a comment that they left on this NAM, and I think it's a good perspective. He basically said, like, that's cool, you had a good experience. Mine was not so great. Super buggy and constantly being asked for microphone permission and having the latency keep resetting to 512 samples. I realized I didn't have the time or patience to deal with something open source. Call me crazy, but convenience is something I'm willing to pay for. So yeah, basically, and that was, they also said it's a really cool project, and I commend Stephen Atkinson, but I'd rather just pay for something that works. I like the Tone X thing. Again, you're paying for something that's going to work in a professional setting. Imagine you've got a session with someone, you're like, oh, we'll just use this open source thing.
Yep.
Hang on, bro. I just need to like get the source code and move a few parameters. Is something you're never going to do in a professional capacity. You just want like, oh, you want guides, you want bass, here you go.
Yep. I create those issues myself with some of the wiring and patching that I do, and it's hard. Like it's hard enough as it is, rather than also deal with other people's stuff too. So yeah, there's that kind of. I'm sure it will become more flexible. It'll become more reliable. It just needs a bit of time. If it's only come out like in the last few weeks or whatever, or when did it come out?
I think it's a couple of months, but it's sort of like it's been, the fan base for it has been growing. And again, it seems like there's a critical mass of people using it and experimenting with it. It's one of those things like smart person does a smart thing and they're really smart at the thing that they're smart at, but then somebody else smart about a different thing comes in, like, a graphical user interface or something.
That's what I was going to say, man. It's like the graphic user interface, or even like talking about Tone X and the interface for that, which is just confusing, the editor, the library, whatever. It's you kind of need, this is why you have a team of people. Like it's hard to be good at everything.
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing, if it remains open source, it'd be interesting to see if you just end up with those people who someone's like, I do this for a day job for software, but you know what, I like guitar tones too, so I'll just knock this out for fun.
Yep.
I can see it in a year or 2 years being way easier to use, being way more stable, way more kind of feature rich, and hopefully still open source. It's really, really cool. Because I did that, and I did a video just called like high gain plugins you might like, where it was some Nembrini audio, some Neural DSP, and the McLaughlin plugin, which was kind of interesting for me doing that video side by side and just swapping between the plugins, and like the user experience was definitely a factor in the way I dialed things in.
I can't remember what you said reflection wise at the end there. Was it just because they all sounded good? I mean, did you what was your favorite of those?
I kind of like them all for different reasons. The Nembrini one was cool because it was just like, here is a sick high gain sound. It's not really the sort of sound I would use all the time, but just like, you put some knobs there and you're done. The NDSP obviously is like a Boogie 2C Plus, which is a pretty cool sound, and they did a really, really good job with that. And they've got, on that, it's like they just have the transpose feature as a button or
I thought that was so clever. I don't know why you don't see that in more stuff.
Excellent. They should, I really hope they have that across all their plugins. Again, the big criticism with them is they have like 15 plus plugins now, and they don't really have a unified.
That's right. I think you mentioned that, didn't you?
And I don't think they are Apple Silicon compatible yet. So
okay.
Yeah, it's sort of
Fuck, man. Pause for 2 seconds. Are you aware of all the Wave stuff that happened like yesterday?
Oh my God, yes.
Fuck, man. I'm very upset about that because
we should talk about it.
Yeah. Well, do you want to finish this and then we'll talk about the Wave stuff? Yep. Sorry to derail, but like you go on. Tell me about this stuff. Tell me about the neural stuff and the unified loader.
It'd just be great to have a unified plugin loader and, Apple Silicon support. It's like they keep pumping out these plugins, but they haven't kind of addressed some of those issues, which obviously aren't issues for them because the people who like that stuff, they're targeting a very particular audience. And, I've got students who are like, when that Archetype Petrucci came out, they just bought it because they were like, oh, it's John Petrucci's plugin, bro. And it's like, yeah, but you've already got like two of the other plugins, did you really test it that much, or did you look at the feature set or whether you need it? Which, hey, is kind of cool. You know, if you love a particular artist and you want to go and buy their plugin. But I think with that stuff, there's very cool features. Like the Tim Henson plugin has this kind of 4-voice kind of pitch shifter where if you feed MIDI into it, you can play single notes and it'll auto harmonize it, which is really, really cool. But that to me is something that you should be able to have with any of their plugins. It shouldn't just be tied to that particular, whether you have to, hey, if you got to pay a bit for it, that's kind of cool. But yeah, it's, that was kind of my main criticism there, where that like transpose thing, the doubler, it's awesome. There's just buttons for it. They're really usable. Great idea. It'd be great to have that on all of the plugins. And then the other one was the Polychrome DSP Thomas McLaughlin plugin, which I found really interesting because just a different approach. It's not like a photo of an amp or, you know, a graphic of an amp and you kind of turn the knobs. It's just like, here's a bunch of sounds that guitar players probably like. And if you want more or less of something, there's buttons to do it. It was really interesting. To me, it was a really nice plugin to use just because I was like, I'll turn that on. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Hey, there's this other thing. I'll turn that on. That doesn't sound as good, so I'll turn it off. Really good reverbs and delays in it. It's they clearly put some thought into how people are going to use it as a plugin, not as, you know, there's this thing, I think, because you're clicking on a screen, it's not a very tactile amp-like thing. There's a bunch of different elements that go into making that usable than just, like, honestly, having to turn a knob with a mouse on your computer does not make sense. It's hard. It's not as satisfying as turning a real knob. So they kind of got around that. There's a lot of push buttons and things like that. And it's very, very like kind of synthwave aesthetic as well, which I enjoyed.
I feel like when I was listening to that, I reckon I liked it the least. And I think it's for a really...
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's for a really silly reason, which is going to be embarrassing when I say it, but there's like a familiarity, is that the word? With knobs, like knobs and buttons and stuff that you used to on an amp. And sometimes it's that thing that tricks you of, because it looks like the amp you're touching, when you turn the knob, you expect it's going to sound a certain way. Whether it does that or not is beside the point, but you have that sort of like that feedback there. And I find sometimes with amps, and it happens in the digital stuff as well, where it's like the dimensionality appears flatter just because it doesn't look like the thing that you used to it looking like.
It's big time. Because it's a full immersion. You're looking, you're hearing.
Yeah. Which is like,
that kind of stuff.
I think that's a thing, that's a generational thing, whereby if you're, let's say like 15 now and you're used to using, like you get that plugin and that's how you dial in sounds, or you're just using Fractal stuff, or you're using the HX software or whatever, it's kind of meaningless. You're dialing in tones by your ears, and that's all you need to do, or you should be doing. But I think there is probably a generation above that, like me and people older than me maybe, that just kind of struggle with that. And it's silly because I think if you A/B, it's not going to sound any different, or it's not going to sound worse. Not any different. But it's just hard to get your head around it. It's silly. I acknowledge that it's silly, because you're talking about like knobs on a plugin. You're completely right. It's very limited in its functionality. It makes a lot more sense to have like faders or whatever. But you know, if you use a SSL style EQ, for example, and there's just something that is recognizable about pushing the red knob up and getting that clear, bright sound, that I can do that on my FabFilter plugins and it doesn't do the same thing.
Big time. I think it's
doesn't feel like it's the same, even if
it imposes limitations on what you can and can't do, and sometimes those limitations are advantageous from an auditory perspective. I think that's definitely right. Speaking of plugins, the pro audio side of the world has been outraged, probably rightfully so. There's been a very, very strong response to the Waves plugin thing, which I've just seen a lot of thumbnails with disappointed faces, and I haven't watched about it, so I don't know the specifics, but I figured you might know a bit more.
Yeah, I'll tell you about it. So Do you have any Waves plugins?
I do. I definitely own a bunch of Waves licenses, and I have none of them installed at the moment. I've got like the Shep's Omni channel I used a bunch of times.
You don't have it anymore, Uncle Leon. Sorry.
Oh, well, there you go.
So what happened is traditionally, well, I don't know when you bought those plugins, but what happens with the Waves thing?
So I should just make an FU Waves video like everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. No, what happens is you can buy the Waves bundle or a Waves plugin, and after you buy it, you have 1 year of them supporting it for you. So if they do an update, they constantly put out different versions of the plugin. So they were up to version, I think, 13 or 14 as of last week. It doesn't matter. But if your plugin is older than a year old, and for example, you go from an operating system that doesn't support the previous version and you need to get the next version up, then you're going to have to pay for it. So in terms of operating systems, across the time that I've been a Waves user and an Apple user, it hasn't been like too big of an issue. It's like when it comes to updating the plugins, it costs something like they cap it at about $240 US, and that will update. If you have all of their plugins, then it'll update for a maximum of that much money. If it's only like one plugin that you paid $29 for, it's obviously not going to cost $240 to update it. It's like scaled down, right? I've got a lot of Waves plugins, and so it's usually like $240. So that's kind of fine. I found I'd probably have to update them every 3-4 years. So it's a pain in the ass because it ends up being like a $400-ish, $450 bill to install those plugins. They're not the only people that do that. Like Antares with Autotune, I've had to pay for different versions of that, which is about $130 US to upgrade, just so you can use it on different computers sometimes, which is a real pain in the dick as well because that's just one plugin. So anyway, the Waves thing, it's called the WUP, the Waves Update Policy or Update Program, WUP. That's very funny. I never actually put that together.
Not the WAP.
Not the WAP. So that's been all well and good, even though people really like hate paying that fee. So
ultimately, it's like Avid, right? Like every year it comes around, I'm like, I got to renew my Pro Tools license. Maybe I'll just get Reaper, and then I just shut up and pay it and use Pro Tools for the next year. Yeah.
So what Waves did is they canned the WUP. Not out of nowhere.
They went full Ben Shapiro on it, did they?
Well, yeah. What they did is there was very quiet murmurings that this was happening like last Friday, and the idea was that they were completely getting rid of the WUP, and so from the 26th or the 27th of March, it would be subscription only. So you can get access to all their plugins, of which there's like over 200 now. The most expensive one is like $24 US a month subscription. And then the cheaper one is like $14 a month subscription, right? Yep. So with that thing, you get, if they release a new plugin, then they'll add it to the bundles. You get immediate access to all that sort of stuff. You don't have to pay WUP anymore. All the plugins just kind of happen automatically. So that's cool. There's like a lot of benefits to that. And I do subscriptions with a lot of plugins. However, I have not updated the WUP for like 2 years, I think, or maybe, almost 3 years since I got my Mac Mini. None of my plugins will work on Apple Silicon. So if I ever update this computer, I'm unable to update whatsoever any of these plugins to work with the next generation of computers. So that's same as you. All the plugins that you own, even if you wanted to update them, install them, you won't be able to do that anymore.
You don't own them anymore.
No. So that's why it's a real pain in the ass, because I've spent like thousands, maybe let's just say conservatively $2-3 grand on the plugins themselves, as well as updating the WUP, let's say like 3-4 times over the last 10, 12, 15 years, probably 10, 12 years. So I've put a significant amount of money into this stuff. And right now it's an issue for me because I'm not needing to install it on different computers. But I was looking at getting a new like Apple Silicon computer sometime in the next probably 6 to 12 months. And it means I won't have access to any of those plugins unless I go on the subscription. But what's even worse is you get something like 100 plugins on the cheaper subscription and like 200 plus with the more expensive subscription. A lot of the plugins I already own are only available on the expensive subscription. So for example, they'll give you the CLA 1176 plugin in the cheaper one, but not the LA2A plugin. which I use both of those, and I bought that bundle. I actually have 2 copies of that bundle, I think. And they're to use the one plugin that I would like to use, and that's on a bunch of my old projects. I have to pay an extra $10 a month for that, for the access to that. So this is why people are so shitty about it, because I've got a lot of bundles and I've spent a significant amount of money, but other people have spent way more than I have over the journey, and it's kind of ends up being all for nothing, because you end up being having to pay the entire thing again every year, or forced to pay that money every year. For me, I saw the murmurings of it last Friday, so they might be getting rid of the WAP and all this sort of stuff, and I was like, fuck, I better update that. Firstly, I forgot, but secondly, I didn't really have $400 that I could just go to on all those plugins to update it at the drop of a hat, because I've got to fucking replace a toilet literally tomorrow. And that's going to cost me several $100s. And it's
things that you don't think about in studios, like the toilet.
Exactly. That's got to be fixed. And I was like, fuck, well, I'm not going to put that off just so I can update my Waves plugins. It's fuck that. And then they pull the trigger on it. So just to let you know, that announcement happened yesterday morning as we record. So it's approximately 36 hours from when we're recording. And the Gear Sluts post has 966 replies in that time. Gear Space thing, sorry. So people are really unhappy about it. I don't think there's anybody in the world that is defending them for this. It really sucks. And what it means is they might, I'm not sure if the bad press is going to mean anything to them, and they may allow you to do it. It might be one of those situations where their hand is forced or whatever. I'm just going to have to move away from using the Waves plugins in the future, because I don't want to pay another subscription. And what I'll do is, if I need to open old sessions, I'm just going to have to pay a month subscription just so I can open old sessions up when the time happens, which is a real pain in the ass. But unfortunately, that's the only way I'm going to be able to do it, because I don't want to deal with this that much cost every year. People
on top of all the other subscriptions that you have
it's
in your life.
Well, that's another $40, $45. If I get the one that I need, that's $40 to $45 extra a month for literally for nothing. Well, I get all these extra plugins that I don't want or need just to use the plugins that I already own. So, that's the controversy.
I'll give you a counterexample to that.
Is it from Dragon Ball Z?
It's not from Dragon Ball Z, but I'll do my best to try work some Dragon Ball Z references into it. I got an email from FabFilter a couple of days ago, which said, hey, we've added Apple native silicon support to all of our plugins. We recommend you go and download them. If you already own them, you just go and download them and install them again, and then they work. Even I saw Pro Tools, now has native Apple silicon support. But you know what doesn't? For me, which I need on everything, is Isotope. They haven't updated vocal denotes. So I'm still running it all in Rosetta, which sucks. Well, it doesn't suck. It's fine. But it's very, very close. I'm sure once Isotope is silicon native, then it'll all be hunky-dory for me. But that's, to me, FabFilter, deservedly so, has a pretty loyal user base, or Valhalla, where it's hey, we've updated everything. It was a bunch of work on our end, but here you go. Thanks for basically keeping us alive. Whereas Waves, it just seems like they're oh well, if people don't want to use it, we'll just deal with it, because we'll just keep selling subscriptions.
Yeah, and there's the positives of the people that I have heard say, who's this targeted at? It makes sense. It's if you're a younger person getting into this industry or doing it as a hobby, and you have access to literally 200 plugins plus a month for whatever that cost is, that's a reasonable deal. It's not cheap, but it's kind of reasonable. So you can sort of understand why, rather than spend all your money up front like the rest of us have for the last couple of years, it's very beneficial to new people coming through. But it's a real fuck you to people that have been using it for literally 25, 30 years.
You've shafted your long-term users just to make it easier to get new people in the system, which isn't cool. Another great example, Fractal Audio released, they've got Dynacabs now, where you can move a virtual microphone around on the cabinet. And if you've got an XFX 3, it doesn't change any of the they didn't delete the existing user IRs. Your existing presets aren't broken by it. It's just a new thing. I think they said it's still in beta at the moment, but when it launches, it's going to be like 35 cabs. So it's like they're just giving their existing users like 35 new high quality IR packs to use with a nice kind of visual indicator of how to use it.
Yep. Are you the nice indicator of how to use it?
Unfortunately, my face is not featured in the Axe Edit view on there. So, but I did a video with it yesterday. I did another one today. I actually did another one for the G66 channel. So I've been playing around with the Dynacabs a lot. What I found really, really interesting was, so the way they've shot them, they're all perfectly phase aligned. And I was kind of blending like, dynamic and a ribbon. And I was like, this is good, but it's still a bit like spicy sounding. You play around with the phase alignment a little bit and it's just like, it's so good. Because obviously phase is a thing and it doesn't make it like massively you can make it massively out of phase, but it's like, you know what, you want to like bump a microphone 1/10 of a millimeter, you can do that and you can, without having to use like high cuts and low cuts and all that kind of stuff. It's, you can kind of get a bit closer before you do all that stuff.
I actually messed around with that in the Tonex a bit. I found that feature of it quite useful. In
general, the VIR.
Yeah, I quite liked those cabs versus the other IRs that they have in there. I'm sort of like, not been a huge fan of the 2-notes dynamic ones, the dynamic IRs.
Interesting. I actually haven't tried them.
When I first got the Reload and the Wall of Sound plugin, I tried them a little bit, but I sort of found, I think everyone sort of did, like when I got that, people saying, "I'll get your own hammer cabs or your Justin York ones or whatever." I think that's what I ended up getting.
Yep.
And they do sound better. And it's just that thing of like, pull in one rather than have it be another thing that you've got to keep tweaking to get a sound that you want. So it's really good. Like the concept of it's really good, like the dynamic cabs in everything. It's just something that I'm like, fuck, I just don't want to think about this one thing so much, which is partly why, like, I've got all these cabinets of mine pretty well mic'd up. I pretty much put the mic in the same position on every cab, unless it sounds bad, and then I'll move it. And then, like, you sort of tweak the amp from there. It's from a practical perspective, or at least a studio perspective, mic position makes a big difference, but once you work out what you like, it's pretty easy to get it in the same spot. Blending mics is another whole battle, which I've actually got it. I've done it a few times in my template at the moment, and I mentioned this last week. Doing a session and recording a DI signal so that I could play it back through the amps to adjust a guitar sound for someone. So that worked really well. But I do have a template set up where I've got pink noise within some tracks, so I can run that out through the reamp box through the cabinet, so I can use that to align the mics. Because this is kind of a Michael Wagner thing, I guess. He didn't invent this, but it was him or Slipperman. It was one of the two. But some of the guitar recording research I've been doing recently for my own interest. Like I usually will phase align microphones by getting like a high spiky transient. So usually mute the high E string around the 15th fret and just like pluck the string really quick. So it goes through the cabinet into the microphones, and then you've got a visual indication of where the mics line up, right? At least from the transient. Because in theory, if where the spike happens, if the spike happens at the same spot on two mics, then it means that the mics are the same distance from the cabinet, and then they align perfectly, right? So that's the theory of it. However, yeah. If you actually look at the waveforms, sometimes they change over time, right? And so what may appear as completely in phase at the very start of a signal, it is possible that the low end may be different in each microphone if they're very different types of microphones, or the room is different. And so, you might find that like you can move the mic a little bit and all of a sudden the bottom end actually comes into phase a little bit more, which requires listening and not just requires looking at a screen and like plopping it in the right spot. Eric Valentine, actually, who's got one of the best YouTube channels for recording, he he did an experiment not experiment. He's got a technique with using like a dick mic on a drum kit, which is you just put a mic over the kick drum, pointed at the dick of the drummer, and you can use it as kind of a trashy drum sound, or you can manipulate it. But he just like arbitrarily using a time adjuster plugin shifts that like somewhere in relation to the other mics in the drum kit, and you just can feel the bottom end change, where it's like that doesn't seem logical, right? From a
yeah. I think having the bottom end phase aligned is probably a more important thing than having the top end phase aligned.
It's the only thing that matters, because like the
the top end's just going to smooth out, and it's probably got to do with that hearing as well.
Well, like it's a physical thing too. Like the waveforms will cancel, and you'll hear very audible comb filtering happening when it's wrong. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off in terms of your ears, but
no, that's comb filtering is the phase that I'm looking for. So it's really interesting. Even but then you can use. I guess it's the same thing that the Fredman technique uses with two SM57s. Yep. You're using the difference in phase response.
It's more
to smooth out some of the high end.
I don't know if that's phase so much. I think that's more you have one mic that's off axis to the other, so the frequency response is different. It's not I guess there's an element of phase to that, depending on how the frequencies add and cancel. But you're picking up. I guess you're just like generally picking up different sounds. I guess like I would think of the phase in that relation as being like more of a distance thing, because in the Fredman, like stereo miking technique, the capsules or the diaphragms of the mics are roughly in the same position, or should be in the same position to maintain phase. It's more of a it's more of a adding cancellation thing of frequencies. I don't know if that's a phasing thing. Actually, it probably isn't a phasing thing. Sorry, I'm like talking to myself as I'm trying to work out the question.
We're deep in the rabbit hole.
This is what happens when you come study at North Metro TAFE and have a lesson from Troy Nababan. It's a lot of rambling. But anyway, getting back to the topic, which was the wait, what was the topic? We were talking about FU waves, DynIRs. I guess like so the pink noise thing. Just before I just to finish that thought, if you run pink noise through your cabinet, you can, because it's a constant stream of like full frequency band sound, you can use that to phase align your microphones. So the idea is that if you reverse the phase of one of the mics, so the two mics independent to each other are out of phase, if you sweep one mic around the cabinet, around the speaker cone in relation to the other, and you listen for where it sounds like there's the most amount of cancellation, therefore it's the quietest, or the bottom end is the smallest.
That's where they're the most.
That's the most in phase. Once you reverse it's not reverse the phase, it's reverse the polarity. Once the polarity goes back to normal, they should be theoretically most in phase. And that is very true and very accurate. And I've done that before. It's just a lot more time consuming and requires you to go and physically move a microphone. If you have headphones on, then that's awesome. If you've got an assistant that can do it, that's even more awesome. I made the bass player from the band I recorded last weekend do this with a microphone in front of a 4x12 when I was doing a guitar solo. Again, ripped it off Eric Valentine. But it's so funny because, Leon, I don't think you and I have done this specific exercise, but like when you're listening back to it, like at a 57 on one speaker and then a 441 that ended up being a foot or a foot and a half or something from the cabinet. But it's like where we started, and then as he slowly moved it in, you just feel that like that jet engine, that like all of a sudden it comes back in phase, and then it's fucking spot on. So yeah, that's not with pink noise, that's with actual riffage, I guess. I think we did it with a reamp signal. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get this to get it to work.
That's really interesting.
Recording sorry, go on.
Oh no, you go, mate. Recording guitars.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so many different techniques to doing it. My technique is fairly, from a miking perspective, is semi locked in. I know it works, and now I'm trying a few different techniques to see, because I know the thing that always works.
Exactly.
I will say on that, which if you got a vintage 30, put your mic roughly around the edge of the cone / like where the edge of the dome, the speaker dome in the middle, and the paper meat. Just chuck a 57 there, you're basically good to sound. However, Leon, I'll just say this to you because, to everybody, but that works really well for me on a V30, but because the dust cap on a Greenback is way smaller, I actually don't like it in that position as much. I find it needs a little bit more wang jangling. So
Bit of wang jangling. That's a very, very technical term.
So anyway,
unique to this podcast.
Well, yeah, that's from Let's Sausage, isn't it? No, it's from something else. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Not less. So what's Ordinary Sausage? That's the one.
Yeah.
No, it's from something else. Anyway, again, rambling. I want to talk about.
I wanted to answer one of these questions that we received.
Oh yeah,
from friend of the podcast, Chris Bernard.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, did you read the question?
I did. So, bit of Nuno, bit of Chris, local connection.
Yeah. So, Chris, we met him probably like 2010, the first AMP day that we did.
Yeah, that was a bit of some very quick background. This ties in kind of nicer. There was some videos put on the internet by friend of the podcast, James Lugo. It was the ultimate high gain amp shootout where they had lots of amps.
35 amps, I think.
35 amps. And it was the same. It was done, like reamping the same track, and you could hear Soldanos and Bogners and Marshalls. I remember it's one of the first kind of guitar nerd moments I had on YouTube where I was like, this is amazing.
I think at the time it was one of the best resources and like well thought out ways of doing that experiment. It's probably, I won't say this is the only one of its kind, but it's the only one that was like worth checking out at the time. So really, really cool. But we saw that video, I guess, whenever it came out, 2010 or 9 or 11 or somewhere around there. It must have been 10. And, there used to be a forum, like a message board in Perth called perthbands.com, which is, I don't think it's there anymore. I went to it long gone. But that was where we used to, like pre-Facebook, where we would buy and sell gear. There was a few little communities of guitar nerds and generally it was for like Perth music. So that was pretty cool. But I put a thing out there in, it must have been, 2010 or maybe 2011 again.
Here
a little
we go.
Fuzzy.
High gain amp shootout. 13 years ago, that's when that was uploaded.
So that's 2010?
2010.
Yeah. So it's about that same year, but I was working at a different studio and I said like, well, okay, all of us that are talking shit on this forum, let's just come to Crank and we'll put some gear up and have a listen to it and it'll be fun. So probably like maybe 8-10 people came. I remember you came down. Johnny C, it was the first time we met Johnny C. Anarchy Audio, which we'd still need to talk to him very soon. But Chris came down as well. I actually remember Chris said something that it's he was like, because I'd mic'd a cabinet up and we listened to all this stuff in the through studio monitors, and he was like, "Can I go in there and actually have a listen to it?" And rather than hear it a mic'd up amp, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's really." I don't think I followed him in too much because I'm like, I want to hear this from a studio perspective, but it's like, I really wish I'd actually taken the time to walk in there, just deal with the abuse on the ears and hear the amp in a space, because that's something that I've now mentioned I do quite a lot. So, you were right 13 years ago there, Chris. But anyway, so Chris came to the amp shootout and the second one as well. Brought some gear along because he had the Digitech stuff. Remember the rack?
Yeah. Running a rack, that was pretty interesting.
But anyway, so Chris has been listening to the pod, which is awesome. And sorry that I didn't reply to your message as well. I had meant to do that all week because you got me thinking. And when I'm thinking, I'm not replying. But he asked about the Nuno Betancourt Randall amp, because we are all smart people here in Perth and we all love Nuno Betancourt. So, shall I read the message?
Please read the message and then we'll do our best to...
Well, he said he's loving the podcast, but what can you tell me about the Randall NB King amp as the backstory of how it was invented in Perth, and the backstory of how it was invented in Perth? As far as I know, with Peter King at Joondalup Music. The additional story I heard was it was a modded Ashton head. Can we confirm, deny any details of the story? So that was the message, and a great question. And actually, I had been doing a little bit of looking into that amp not long before he sent that message, just by coincidence. So do you know too much about that?
I have some recollections of it because I used to go to Joondalup Music a lot. It was basically my local music store.
Firstly, did you ever play the amp, the Nuno amp?
I've never played the Nuno amp, the production Randall, but I did play the King branded amp that I understand is part of the development of it. So the long and short of it is that Nuno married Baby Animals lead singer Susie DiMarchi. And I forget if it's Susie's brother or cousin or what the relationship there is, but family member is Peter King, who owned Joondalup Music and modified amps and did things like that. So the very first time I ever remember going into Joondalup music, I remember them mentioning it was Pete's son actually saying, "Oh, well, it must be a sibling thing," because he said, "Oh yeah, Nuno Betancourt from Extreme's my uncle, basically."
I remember mixing him at a gig in Fremantle around like 15 years ago, and that's like
Dan's his name. Yep.
And that's the one thing I remember him saying as well, like the first sentence.
And I just remember thinking like, no, he's not. You're just lying. Anyway, I was wrong. And Dan's a lovely guy as well. So and big time gear nerd, and always had some fun stories to share. But yeah, I remember going in one day and he was like, "Oh, hey, check this out." And there was an amp in there which said King on it. And he was like, "Yeah, this is, we've been taking these Ashton amps and modifying them. Like they're actually pretty, Ashton made a tube head at one stage. We should do a podcast about Ashton. I'd love to know more about the history of that brand." Nevertheless, yeah, basically it was I'm pretty sure it's a modified Ashton amp is what I'm getting at, Chris, where, yeah, they rebranded it. And then he was like, "Yeah, Nuno's been, jamming on it or whatever and really likes it."
Yeah, I mean, like that's sort of what I understand as well. Like and I read something today about it where I think it's the Ashton Viper. That's the specific amp that they were modding. I'm pretty sure Gibbsy was playing King amps for a while as well.
He was, yeah.
Which, unfortunately, Chris Gibbs, shout out to you, but I was supposed to work with him at TAFE yesterday, but my son was sick, so I wasn't able to go in. But I actually had I was planning to have a chat to him about it because I think he was working at Joondalup Music around the same time as well. Yep.
Chris has got some great, the Ashton thing, the Monterey Guitars thing, all of that. I think he's got a lot of first-hand knowledge about it.
So I really wanted to find out a bit more because there's actually a video of Chris playing he did an instructional video thing long, I think it was about 2004. But there's some clips of it on YouTube, and he's playing a King amp in the background of that. I remember that. I think it's a red one.
While we're talking about this, I'm going to look up Chris Gibbs guitar, Larrivee guitars played by Chris Gibbs. That's a thing.
That's such good guitars, those Larravees.
What's Chris's Noisathon? Yes, yep. That's right. All right, I'm going to bring up Chris's YouTube channel while we're doing this. So.
Well, yeah, there's a tapping thing that, like, it's actually a really cool tapping lick, which is worth checking it out.
Chris is a great tapper, actually. He's playing a King head guitar lesson, two-handed tapping basic lesson. Would recommend. Great lick. And there's a young Chris Gibbs just dominating.
Yeah. So probably the same age as we are right now, and that maybe a little bit younger. Anyway, doesn't matter. But anyway, so the King amps, that's basically what I understand as well. And I think this may be not what happened, but I have a feeling that it was just like, it was supposed to be a King amp. Like that was the deal. Like Nuno was going to be playing these things and start endorsing them properly. But the next thing, like a year or 2 years later, he's got the thing with Randall, which, as I understand it, it's just because Randall was a bigger company and probably more capable of producing the amps. I don't think it was anything more sinister than that. I mean, it's called the NB King, so it's still got his name on it. And I mean, I've watched some interviews with Nuno talking about it where he mentions like Peter King's name. Doesn't say it's his brother-in-law, but just I'm not sure if they actually had split at that point as well. I feel like they split sometime around there. But again, I don't say that to be anything nefarious with the amps being used or not used or anything like that too.
There's definitely some family, there's probably some soap opera element to it as well. In
that
there,
part, I'm not going to. None of my business, and I don't know anything, so I'm not even going to comment on that.
Not that I know anything.
Neither do I.
Yeah,
I just don't want to put that
outside of my far outside of my wheelhouse. Communicating those rumors, but yeah, I think that's a connection. So, that's the Perth connection.
Yeah, but the Perth connection, King amps, they never happened. They went with Randall instead. But as far as I know, it's the design. It's like his amp design, the thing that Nuno wanted. The amp itself, from the little bit of reading I did, was apparently not something he played for very long. So allegedly, I say that as well, not super reliable as a head. So sound aside, I think he apparently took it on some tours and it was like dying on him a bit, and wasn't able to, wasn't like reliable enough for him to pursue. And he's been playing DSLs for like 10 years now.
Yeah. So
in fact, did you watch the Super Bowl? Did you watch the Super Bowl with Rihanna?
No, actually I didn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he played that. That was like a month
Yes.
and a half ago, 2 months
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
Yeah, so he was playing a DSL on stage on that gig because I remember looking out for it because the amp's got that weird VU meter on it, which
Yeah.
when it came out, I was like, genius. Like, yeah, why don't all amps have a VU on it? And then it took me 2 seconds to realize, like, what does it do? Like, it's not going to tell you the loudness of anything because, like, the volume that you play at is never going to be required to be metered. He made a comment in another video that I watched about it saying it was useful for telling when tubes were going out because, you know, it had set at a certain level and it wasn't firing as much, but it's kind of like, well, big fucking whoop. You probably hear if it's dying anyway. So, yeah, I'd love to play one of those amps. I didn't ever play the King amps, but we should actually... we were talking about getting some guests on. If we talk to Jason from Headfirst, I'd love to like hip him beforehand to ask him about the Viper, the Ashton Viper, and see if he's got any goss on that. Because I'd be curious to know what was changed, if there's any details he can provide, being that he is Mr. Amp. So that's
Sherlock Amps. Oh wait, Sherlock Amps actually are an amp company. I think out of South Australia.
Is it South? Yeah, that's right. Because they had a cool power amp or something.
Yeah, I think Carnival were using them for a while.
Oh, really?
The Sherlock Fathead. Yeah, that's another Aussie amp company. So, yeah, man, that's
them.
Very, very interesting. Woogie, that was another one at the amp day as well.
Yeah,
very, very interesting. So, look, Chris, thank you for the question. Thank you for watching the podcast.
Don't know if we confirm too much, but what I'm going to do in the next week, quickly before you say that, is I will do a bit more research with a couple of people that were around in that time, and if I have any follow-up information, then I will present it next week.
And eventually, we'll get our own Netflix show about amps. Just two guys being dudes.
I can't think of a joke there, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, cool bananas, Uncle Liam. Well, is that basically it for today?
I think that's it for this week. If anybody else has any questions, message us on Instagram or leave a comment on my YouTube. You know where to find us. And anyone in Perth, they can catch the Gear Podcast live at the Henley Brook on Friday from 4 till 7, and playing music. If
you happen to be a Fremantle Dockers supporter and you're at the Derby on Sunday, give me a wave. And I'll make sure I wave back to you. Who's
going to win the Derby? Quick prediction before we go.
Oh man, I really hope it's the Dockers. I think if they go 0-3 to start the year, it's going to be a very, very, very long year. But happy that the Eagles had a good win on Sunday.
Yeah, I think the Eagles could pinch one.
They could. They're going in like maybe not favourites, but it's not like a huge upset. Like the last Derby was a blowout. Like that was embarrassing. Oh, the first. I think it was actually the first Derby. The Freo home one was a little closer, but it was still domination. So we'll see. Anyway, it's a good weekend for West Australian football. Most importantly,
that's a really important thing. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. We will see you next week on the Gear Podcast.
Peace.